I'm sorry, who was it that you were asking to share screen with? I'm sorry.
John Kohler will need to share his screen. And I think we're streaming now. Are we live?
Just one couple more seconds here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm here. Okay. She's on.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are now called the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee meeting to order. It is Wednesday, July 12th, 2023 at 3:30 p.m. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Keys. Alderman Browning.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Keys. Alderman Vollmer. Chair Schweitzer, did you want me to?
Did you call my name yet?
Yes, I did.
Good. Present.
Did you want me, I'm sorry, Chair Schweitzer, did you want me to wait for Alderwoman Keys to say something? I see she's trying, but we can't hear her.
Yeah, it's fine. If we can't hear, we'll just keep going.
Okay.
So now I will entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes from July 5th, 2023.
So moved. Second.
Moved by the Alderman from the 14th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Keys. Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Keys. We have 3 aye votes.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on. We have no board bills for review and no resolutions for review today. Today's main goal is to have a committee discussion and to hear presentations from the members of the administration regarding the American Rescue Plan Act funds that have been allocated for paving and traffic calming, as well as an update on the mobility planning that has been going on in the city. There's some board bills that we've reviewed as a committee and discussed at length with the administration and with each other. So I really appreciate everyone really diving into this topic to try to make sure that as we move forward with the millions of dollars that are being spent on this topic, that we are doing so in the best possible way, taking into account all of the ordinances that we've already passed as a city to make sure that the streets that are being worked on are coming together in the way that I think we want to see happen. So without further ado, I know that we do have a presentation prepared by, I believe, John Kohler and Scott Ogilvie, with Grace Young of the mayor's office also perhaps weighing in. So John, if you want to, actually, before we start, if anyone who's going to speak can just raise their right hand and turn their mic off for a minute, and we'll just swear everyone in at once now, and that way we won't have to worry about it the rest of the meeting. So if everyone, thank you for being ready, Scott, John, Grace, Casey, anyone, thank you very much. Clerk Higgs, do you mind swearing folks in?
Sure. Do you affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Wonderful. So again, without anything further, we'll just dive right into the presentation. And John, I'll hand it over to you. If you or anyone who speaks don't mind the first time you speak, just saying who you are and what your role is, and then diving in. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Alderwoman Schweitzer and committeemen. I did want to say that this is a shared presentation from myself, John Kohler, with the city's Board of Public Service Planning and Program Manager. And I'm going to pass it to 2 others that have been involved with this development of the presentation, and I believe Grace will give some introductory remarks, and then turn it to Scott, and then I'll also provide comments on the presentation. Grace, did you want to introduce yourself and give an introduction?
Sure, happy to. Hi, everyone. Grace Kung with the Mayor's Office, Senior Advisor to Mayor Jones. And we're excited to be here today to share an update on where things have been since we formally passed Board Bill 120 and Board Bill 184. The ordinance numbers can also be on the screen. So John and Scott will be walking us through on what some of the plans are from Board Bill 184, which, as a reminder to anyone on the call, is where we saw the 5 major arterial corridors being identified, as well as Board Bill 120, which was a supplemental infrastructure bill that went into offering additional traffic calming solutions along those corridors, as well as addressing major crash hotspot locations and addressing completed traffic studies. So thanks again for having us. And with that, I will pass it to Scott.
Sure. Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon, everybody, Alderwoman Schweitzer and members of the committee. I'm Scott Ogilvie, City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency, Program Manager for Complete Streets. And John and I are going to walk through this presentation, which we recently gave to the Community Mobility Committee, which is primarily a citizens advisory committee on transportation and mobility issues to the city. So we're going to be covering the same territory. Alderwoman Schweitzer, were you at that presentation?
Yes, I was, and that's why I wanted to have it here.
Great. Okay. So I'll just jump in. Board of Public Service, Mayor's Office, Planning and Urban Design, we've been working collaboratively to identify the scope of work and the projects that will be built with the funding authorized in Ordinance 71650 and 71494. Between those two ordinances, there are approximately $43.5 million in infrastructure, arterial repaving, and safety improvements identified. And so we've been working over the last month to refine the exact locations and to start the process within the Board of Public Service of onboarding the engineering consultants we need to fully design the projects. There are, of course, 5 north-south corridors, including Goodfellow, Union, Kings Highway, Jefferson, and Grand. There are 5 traffic studies that will be implemented, accounting for approximately $12 million. And there are 10 crash hotspot locations that we have identified through data analysis. And there's $3.5 million in that board bill to make safety improvements at those locations. John, maybe we'll go to the next slide and turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. So we have this $43.5 million of program on the initiatives that Scott mentioned. The Board of Public Service solicited qualification statements for any transportation engineering firms that were interested in participating in the design for those services. And we did convene and selected 3 engineering firms, which happened to be the same 3 on-call transportation engineering firms that we have currently assigning task orders. So the committee selected 3 because of the quantity of work involved and the short timeframes tied to the ARPA funding. And they are WSP, CBB, and Lockmuir. And we have extensive experience with all 3 of those with traffic studies and other transportation federally funded projects and other work that they've all 3 of them done throughout the city. So the 3 projects are all the initiatives, including the arterial designs, the hotspot locations, and the traffic implementation corridors will be broken up in by those 3 firms. And there are some of the within the 5 arterials that overlap hotspots and overlap some of the studies that we are going to be implementing. And all those will be designed within that same firm where there's an overlap with the hotspots and the traffic study implementation. So Scott mentioned this is a breakdown of each of the 5 arterial corridors that were identified in the initial board bill. Goodfellow from Delmore to Halls Ferry Circle. And you see the limits on Union, Kings Highway, Grand, and Jefferson. These are north-south principal arterials totaling about 32 miles of roadway, centerline mileage. So we are just now entered into the contracts with the 3 engineering firms to do the designs on these corridors, including the hotspots and including the traffic study implementation. I wanted to just touch on what is entailed in these designs. So we know that streets initially receive money for paving and some ADA upgrades at intersections. We recognize very quickly that there's an opportunity to design these roadways to look at the possibility for lane reductions and right-sizing the roadway, but also looking at the possibility of implementing traffic calming. So we petitioned the mayor's office through the ARPA second round of allocations to pursue funding to do traffic calming, additional enhancements to the roadways, could be raised concrete bump outs, could be painted bump outs, flexible delineators, various features to calm traffic and pedestrian improvements. But we wanted to make sure to comply with ADA that we upgraded every curb ramp along every arterial that's not in compliance with the current Americans with Disabilities Act. So there's a lot of work to potentially be done here, and we've got a limited budget. We're going to do what we can, and the ultimate end result will be traffic calming that fits within the budget we have. Now, on the traffic study areas that are within these arterials, those might have a little higher level of traffic safety elements because we have additional monies for those sections of the corridor. So the traffic study areas, and these were studies that were primarily funded through Ward Capital on Goodfellow. That section is between Lillian and Halls Ferry Circle. We have various raised bump outs. We have a potential mini traffic circles within that corridor. On Kings Highway, the completed study was Lindell to Dr. MLK. Grand, just south of the South Grand District from Utah to Chippewa. We've got a completed study. And then the Chippewa is actually centered around the Ted Drews area where we're looking at traffic calming at that site and then the implementation of a traffic signal mid-block to provide access for pedestrians to cross Chippewa toward the Ted Drews area. And then lastly, there are 3 streets in the downtown area on Broadway and 4th Street running south from Shoto to Convention Plaza, and then east-west on Washington from 4th Street to 14th Street. Again, we were just now starting these designs. And the last 2 at Ted Drews, Chippewa, and downtown, those are standalone projects that are outside of the 5 arterials that are in that initial board bill. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation to Scott to talk about the hotspot locations.
Sure, thanks, John. So within the bill, there's $3.5 million identified to cover 10 crash hotspots. So we used 4 years of Missouri State Highway Patrol data, which is the most comprehensive and authoritative data set for all crashes, both vehicular and other types involving bicycles and pedestrians. So we took all of the injury crashes from 2018 to 2021, which totaled 15,761 crashes with injuries in the city of St. Louis. And we identified where the clusters of those crashes were. They tended to be at intersections, which is not surprising. They tended to be at the intersection of 2 arterial streets in many cases. And there were also clusters along highway exit ramps. And so what we did is we screened through a long list where we identified about 25 vehicular and 25 bike and pedestrian crash hotspots. And we looked at where we thought we could make meaningful safety improvements within this budget, which, as you can see, is about $350,000 per location. We did exclude some locations if they were adjacent to highway exit ramps, because those locations, while they might have had crash clusters, would require investment by MoDOT. And given the limitations of the funding and the time span we have to complete these projects with the ARPA funding, it was not going to be feasible to do that type of coordination with MoDOT. So we have 10 projects in 10 locations that we are in control of, that we are managing the street. And quite a few of them are on or adjacent to these corridors as well. So that really allows us to do additional enhancements beyond what would have been allowed for within the arterial repaving and ADA funding. There are a couple locations that intersect with MoDOT maintained surface streets, such as Gravois, and we'll do close coordination with MoDOT to make sure that we can complete those projects. I think the next slides, we walk through all the locations. So John, if you just want to, oh, here we go. Yes, and additionally, there were, I think this is really important as well. So there were 2 hotspots that showed up on North Grand that are already within the project limits of the Brickline Greenway on North Grand, which Great Rivers Greenway is managing. And these are locations that we think we would have chosen as hotspots, but because there's these extensive improvements that are going to be made in conjunction with the Brickline project, we're not addressing them directly as hotspots, but within the bill, there was additional funding allocated to the Brickline Greenway project, so we can partner a very robust partnership with Great Rivers Greenway to rebuild that full corridor on North Grand from Natural Bridge down to Cass, and then moving west on Cass over to Spring. So these are spots that we know we have crash problems, and we're really glad there's an existing project with Great Rivers Greenway that is going to make really substantial improvements at those locations. Then the next slides, yeah, we'll walk through, oh, the project map. I think we get to the hotspot locations later. So here's the full project map. It includes hotspot areas, those coordinated Brickline Greenway improvements, the 5 traffic study locations that we'll be implementing, and then the repaving corridors. And so here we just zoom in on the map so we can see the locations starting at the north end, then moving to the center of the city, and then south. I think that map has been distributed to everybody so they can take a closer look at it. So the corridors, again, just showing some typical conditions today on these corridors: Goodfellow, Union, Kings Highway, Grand, and Jefferson. And I think important to note, one thing you'll notice on the map is that this is Jefferson, south, the south half of Jefferson. That's because we already have under construction the reconstruction of Jefferson from Market moving up to Parnell, where it intersects with Natural Bridge. So that project is already underway. There's really substantial improvements being made today in that location. So that's why it's not on this paving corridor, because we already have funding to repave it. And the hotspots, kind of typical conditions we're seeing at the hotspots today: Broadway and Walnut, Kings Highway and Lindell, Florissant and Palm, Kings Highway and Delmar, Grand and Gravois, Lindell and Whittier. And then project schedule. So I think key to note is that the engineering work is now beginning. Board of Public Service spent a lot of time, well, not a lot of time. I'd say they've been acting quickly, but they've been thinking carefully about how to move these projects through. And as John mentioned earlier, they've been assigned to 3 different traffic engineers who are now actively engaged with the projects. So the design is starting now. There'll be a public engagement phase after we have some preliminary designs, and that public engagement phase will come this winter. So winter of 23 and early 24. Then those 3 firms will complete final engineering next year through mid 2024. And then we'll get to the bidding phase. So these are all really substantial projects. They need to be bid out to construction firms to build them. I think one thing I will note is that the bids are being packaged. So in locations where you have a repaving corridor and a hotspot, those are not separate projects. Those are bid together. They're designed as a single project, and they will be built as a single project. And much the same in areas where you have a repaving corridor and a traffic study implementation. Those are not being treated as separate things. They're being treated as one integrated project that is designed together and will be constructed together. So then we'll get to construction. We hope to start some of the smaller projects later in 2024. We think the bulk of the work will happen in 2025. And of course, there's the deadline to complete all this work towards the end of 2026, when all the ARPA funding needs to be completely spent. John, do you have anything to, or Grace, anything to add on schedule?
Not on the schedule, but I did want to mention a significant component of the design involves the development of citywide traffic calming standards. Many of you know that the CMC developed a draft guideline of various traffic calming features that have been used throughout the city. We have taken that report and we are refining it, modifying it, and making official, accepted traffic calming design standards that we can then utilize on a citywide basis. So there's consistency throughout the city for drivers that, so that they'll have recognizable features throughout the city on a uniform basis. So that draft is scheduled to be completed in the fall of this year. And that will be a guiding tool that we share with all the consultants so that the designs are consistent throughout each corridor.
I'm going to pop in there with a question. When you say that, is this the same as the mobility and transportation master plan? Is that or part of that?
Scott, did you want to address?
Sure. No, these are distinct things. So what the Board of Public Service has done is they've already begun design work on typical traffic calming for arterials. And arterials are more complex, than neighborhood streets. So we've been doing lots of traffic calming on lower volume streets. And I think we face more design and engineering challenges when we look at these higher volume arterials. So to make sure we have a consistent approach, context sensitive, but, sort of the same foundation we're working from on each of these streets. Board of Public Service is already designing these typical traffic calming features that they can use across these corridors. Now, the transportation and mobility study is something we are working on in parallel, but that's a planning level study that will address topics throughout the city. It's about policy, it's about a safety action plan for the whole city, identifying across the city where we have the most needs in terms of safety and looking at where we should prioritize future projects beyond this spending and beyond the projects we already have programmed across the city, and looking at other policy topics as well. And so we have all been working on that together, the mayor's office and planning and Board of Public Service and Streets Department. We've sought input from the Community Mobility Committee on things they would like to see as a portion of the transportation mobility study. And we're very close to putting out the request for qualifications, where we will be interviewing firms, and we'll select a firm or a team that we think is most suited to do this type of work. It's the type of work we have not been able to do in the city of St. Louis in a number of decades. So it's really important in terms of establishing a consensus vision and values for what should be included in the city's mobility system, for engaging the public on these topics, helping to educate the public on what we're doing now and what we would like to do in the future and what the public would like to see. And so that's coming. We expect to have that RFQ out very soon. And then the work will start once we have a consultant team on board.
Thank you for allowing my interruption there. Do you have any more slides for this, or should we
What's left, John?
just
Question.
question?
There we go.
I did interrupt. You all just set up the presentation that well, where it was the right time. Thank you for giving that presentation. Unless you have anything else to say, I'll move through members of the committee to ask some questions. Okay, I believe Alderman Vollmer has joined us. Alderman Vollmer, any questions?
No questions, no. No questions, my former colleague, Mr. Kohler. Thank you very much. Nice presentation, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Alderwoman Keys. Has she left us? Okay. Alderman Browning.
Thank you, and I'm glad you paused on this map, because actually one of my questions is regards this map. So we see certain sections that are outlined with dotted lines and little ovals. Are those areas of special attention? What is going on there?
The dashed outline, those are areas where we already have completed traffic studies. And those are the traffic studies that have been selected to be implemented as part of this project. So those were, that was planning and conceptual level work that was already completed, typically completed through ward capital projects that Alder people initiated in the last just few years, really. And then here, this is where they align, I think, with need or with the corridors we're already working on. So it's a great opportunity to implement some of those planning level studies where we have a conceptual idea of where we want to start. And so the engineering firms can start with that. And with that additional funding that can be allocated in these areas, we can get a higher level of improvements within the traffic study limits.
That's great. Really looking forward to that. And I think certain areas like 4th and Broadway and obviously Kings Highway, that's going to be highly beneficial. I'm curious, as we go down the repaving of these roads, specifically I'm thinking of Kings Highway as that runs through my ward. If we haven't done a traffic study yet, and specifically I'm thinking of Wendell down to Highway 44, we don't have a traffic study that's been completed for that yet. And yet I do think that's a really key area that needs to be closely looked at. As we go down and use these ARPA funds to repave the corridors, what is being done to make sure we're improving the safety in these areas?
So
Yeah, go ahead, John.
in essence, every one of these north-south arterials is a traffic study element in and of itself, but at much larger scale. The ones that were funded were fairly tight in geographical distances, but we are going through a very similar process on each of the corridor, and we could talk about Kings Highway in particular, but we will be engaging the public through public meetings, through our BPS website, where the public will have opportunities to comment and view the plans as they're progressing. It might not be quite as intensive as these defined studies that have occurred. For one, we don't have the luxury of a lot of time due to the tight timelines, and we also have a fairly restricted budget. So we know we've got to be constantly wary of the amount of money that we have to spend on these 32 miles. When it sounds like $43 million is a lot, but in reality, when you add in paving and the curb improvements at the intersections, the curb ramps, plus traffic calming features, we're fairly limited on the extent of the traffic calming itself.
And
So, I mean, we are open to other funding sources for certain areas that would need to be identified very, very early on. If the alderman would want to contribute some funding toward these efforts in specific areas, we are open to that. But at this point, we have to move very quickly to have a biddable design package by next July 24. A lot of work, a lot of engagement. So that's where we stand right now.
And I was just going to add, that's one of the reasons why BPS is already doing that design work for typical traffic calming features on arterials. So they can take that kind of kit of parts that will be ready to go and make some safety enhancements throughout the corridor, not just in the traffic study areas.
Okay, thank you. That does help clarify things a little bit. And I am interested in, so let's talk, because I want to make sure that we're addressing problematic areas. And I'm thinking specifically of right by the hospital complex there. Highly complicated, not easy to just put in, one size fits all solution when you have that many intersections and that many signals. And yet this definitely does need improvements. We see a lot of reckless driving there, a lot of issues.
I did want to quickly expand on that. So as you know, we had a scoped out traffic study with multiple meetings with major stakeholders. So we know what the problem areas are there, and we will be giving all that information that was in that scoping exercise to the consultant for their consideration between I-44 all the way to Lindell.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. And I'm sure there's also opportunities there to work with area partners, just like you are coordinating with, Great Rivers Greenway. In that area, there's certainly a lot of partners that I'm sure would be willing to help as well. And so please do let's communicate, because I want to make sure that we're really utilizing every single source of funds and making sure this can happen as fast as possible so that we can get it in the time frame. The last question I have for you is, how does all this fit in with our dig once policy? This is a large amount of work being done, and I would really hate to see it be undone because we did not coordinate with our utilities.
So what are the requirements and requests of our consulting firms will be to engage with utilities so that they're very well aware of what the city is planning on all these projects, and encourage them to, one, look at their long-term capital and make sure that any project that they have on those corridors potentially be accelerated, make them aware and encourage them to do the work in advance. And that will be relayed to those utility companies throughout the design process early on.
Thanks, John. And Alderman Browning, sorry to interrupt. I think this might be a good opportunity for Casey to introduce herself as well and just share some of the higher level things the administration is also looking at, while we have good faith that our consultants will do as much as they can, as well as the city. And working with our utility companies, we know emergencies occur and there might be other issues that we can't predict. So Casey, I will pass it to you so you can share a little bit more on what the administration is doing on Dig One.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. For the record, Casey Milberg, I'm the policy director in the mayor's office. And we've been looking at our Dig One's policy in the city for a little bit now. The chair of this committee has also been looking at it as well and reached out to us. So we've been having some collaborative conversations and thinking about, okay, what is our policy have that's good? What is it that we might need to hone in on a little bit more? This is part of actually a national conversation that is happening with the influx of federal infrastructure dollars. A lot of cities are either looking at revisiting their Dig Once ordinances that they have on the books, or are looking at implementing them for the first time. So a lot of cities have those same questions. With our ordinance in particular, what prompted our office's interest in taking a look at it was the state of the streets in a lot of parts of the city where you see repaving jobs that have not been particularly of good quality. And when you consider how much money the city has invested into its infrastructure, its streets, I think there's a fair amount of questions and oftentimes frustration in terms of the condition that, repaving jobs that may not be up to quality leave our streets in. And looking at the ordinance, some of the areas that we've been focusing on specifically are, okay, our ordinance currently says that, we require the streets to be restored and the sidewalks to be restored to the same or better condition, but we don't specify what that means in the Dig Once ordinance. So looking at some different models for how that could be affected has been an area of focus. MoDOT, for example, has some formulas that they use. Some standards that we're particularly honing in on are, could we specify standards for restoration, quality, length and extent of repaving, smooth transition, all these common sense things that we know can go a long way towards protecting the investments that the city makes in its streets. Getting a little bit more specific about what we mean when we say section of sidewalk or section of street that has to be repaved, right? And then, looking also at some of the teeth, the enforcement of the policy. What the policy currently says is that, if it's not fully restored up to code, the city can recover costs. What we have seen a lot of times is some utilities, some other entities will either just hand it over to us and say, okay, we'll compensate you for the cost that it takes for you as a city to restore this, or they will do a very shoddy, low-cost job themselves. It's certainly not every single utility. It's certainly not every single circumstance, but I think that anyone who's driven around in the city streets can see evidence in terms of how widespread that practice has unfortunately been. So looking at, what would be appropriate on the teeth side, there's a lot of different models, ranging from, looking at practices that we currently have in place in other aspects in the city, such as for excavation. For that permit, we require a refundable deposit. That's fairly substantial. I want to say it's $1,500, I want to say, a substantial, deposit that is refundable. There are some surety bonds, requirements for that process as well. Looking at, would it make sense for us to implement, specific, financial penalties based on a specific formula. There really are a lot of potential models out there. And when we've been looking at what other cities are doing, that's becoming apparent is how many different approaches to Dig Once ordinances there are. Some, like our cities, take a really broad approach and don't limit it to one kind of broadband or one kind of utility. It's the comprehensive approach. Others are a little bit more limited and focused specifically on Dig Once as it pertains to broadband. So there's a lot of different moving pieces to consider when we're thinking about how we might update, our ordinance. I think that there is a consensus that, some things need to change, and there's some things that, could be a little bit more clear. For example, some cities explicitly state their expectations for coordination practices between, governments and, utility partners in Dig Once opportunities. So, that's something else to be mindful of as well. So yeah, no decisions about directions have certainly been made in any capacity. But, it is something that we are very actively taking a look at and are grateful to have the leadership and partnership of the chair of this committee as part of that conversation. It's been a really interesting learning process for a lot of us, I think, and we're all very mindful that, we are getting ready as a city to implement a lot of changes that are going to be reflecting the investment of a lot of dollars that we, don't want to see, those streets, torn up, and we want to maximize that opportunity, save costs, save everybody a little bit of time, save, pedestrians, drivers a little bit of a headache when it comes to, construction in the future. And now is a really good opportunity and a good time to be thinking about, okay, well, how can we strengthen this policy in a way that's smart, that's going to be sustainable, that's going to reflect, where we are going as a city, and that's going to serve us for many years to come.
Well, thank you very much. That was a really nice, comprehensive answer. I'm really excited to hear that the mayor's office is really looking at this problem seriously and looking to find a solution, not just for now, but the future. I also want to say thank you to Mr. Kohler, Mr. Flake, Mr. Ogilvy. You all have been fantastic in your work. I think we're about to make a huge leap forward here as a city. And this all is extremely exciting. And I know a lot of hard work has gone into it. So I just want to really extend my sincere thank you to you all for your work. And just please let me know how I can help. I am also just ready and willing to get this done. And I think this is a great time for St. Louis. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Browning. Alderman Aldridge, any questions?
Hello. Moment trying to get that all together. Technology. No questions. More of a comment. Also, really want to thank Casey for that explanation on like the Dig One. I know this committee we passed a resolution, and in that resolution we talked about utility companies, and I know there's been a lot of conversations that's been happening when utility companies go underground and do the work, and then they come up, who's responsible to make sure that that pavement is actually fully paved and complete. So super excited to hear that the mayor's office is also looking at that, and I'm sure we'll be working with not just this committee, but Madam Chairwoman to get some kind of better policy on the books. But my comment is mainly, I'm really excited to see the intersections that are being worked on right now is exciting. I know those are a lot of hot spots between what the city's doing and also what Great River Greenway is doing to really ease traffic and to slow it down, to make lanes smaller, to put more walkable greening spaces. I think really important. A lot of times when we talk about attracting people to our city, I think, it's not probably the most work that people look at first when it comes to pedestrian safety or traffic. They think about stadiums, or they think about maybe restaurants, but I think a lot of things that bring people here is also how safe the streets are. What does that look like for people to travel, for people to just be able to walk, for our busing and everything. So I'm really excited that the city is really taking a large approach on how we look at making our streets safe, and it's already kind of being done. I follow former Alderman Scott on Twitter, and to see that amazing bump out that they have right there at Jefferson and Washington, which in the past has kind of been a problematic turning intersection. Those small things are already kind of being in the works of us doing creative infrastructure things compared to in the past of not really looking at how infrastructure can be a problem. So Vice Chair Browning said, I think we're in a really exciting time right now with the city of St. Louis. With all this funds, it would be great when all these projects can get started, and I appreciate all the work that folks are doing to put into it. But it's a huge opportunity to really utilize the funds and collaborate with a lot of different organizations that are doing the same work, and excited to just see this all come into fruition. So whatever way I also can be a help, please let me know, even if it's potentially using ward capitals in certain areas that may touch the 14th, or as you guys are looking into other areas, and it may touch in the ward of how we can do a certain traffic calming things, please let me know, because I think it's critical that we make our streets more safe. We upgrade them to the 21st century, and I want to be a help in whatever way possible. So thank you all for the presentation. I've read the board bills, but to get a recap, since I wasn't here beforehand, to get a recap of all the work between both board bills that are going on, at least on the traffic element of it, is really helpful. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Alderman Aldridge. I want to echo a lot of things my colleagues have said, thanking you all for coming today and all of the work you've done, not only just around American Rescue Plan Act funds, but in the kind of great work of moving the city forward for a long time. It's been a lot of bills that have already passed that I think tried to address some of these issues that we see with utility companies, with how we design streets, and it seems a lot of times that it really comes down to staffing issues for making those bills actually have the teeth that we need or have the follow through that we need. So in terms of the thing that I'm concerned about with this money for our American Rescue Plan Act funds is whether or not this timeline is going to be possible, with not actually putting the bids out until 2024, and then knowing that we have to have the funds encumbered by 2024. Is there any concern? I mean, I don't know who's the best person to answer that in terms of feeling comfortable, because I know how long it's been. I mean, we have projects in my ward and all over the city that have taken a lot longer and are a lot smaller. So
I can weigh in, and Grace, I see you unmuted too. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the clock is something we're very mindful of. We've been working and having ongoing meetings, with accountants on, really drilling into, what does that mean in terms of this project? What does encumber mean in terms of that project? There is a little bit more flexibility with, encumbering the transportation funds than there is for, say, a program like Guaranteed Basic Income, where we have to be extremely nitpicky, nitpicky and persistent about identifying who specifically is going to receive these funds. So yeah, I mean, the clock is certainly something we're very mindful of. I think at this point, we do expect that we are going to be able to encumber those funds. The timeline of ARPA is certainly an active part of the conversation, developing and implementing the timeline of these projects. Grace, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, since you've been more in the conversations and one-on-one with the accountants about the deadlines.
Yeah, I think echo what Casey had shared. I think it's a fair question, Alderwoman, based on past experience from everyone on this call, but we are meeting regularly with the various departments who are representing their departments on this call about timeline, schedule, how we can ensure that we are able to accomplish this by 2026. I think it is personally too early to make speculations that it's not achievable. Let's see where we are in a year, and we might be having more challenging, real conversations, but also in a year we might be having really great positive conversations about ways we've moved this forward. So we are mindful about costs, we're mindful of staffing, and recognize that we can put the best timeline together, but it does require a lot of folks to come together. But I believe in this team, and I believe they are working as best as they can, which I know you do too. So here's to hoping the next year goes as well as we are laying out. And I'm very excited. I think we're all really excited to see St. Louis address some of these major issues.
great. I think that the piece that is part of this is the St. Louis Works and Ward Capital projects and funds. And there's so many different places, as you all know, I don't have to tell you this, where money comes from for transportation projects within the city. All of those things, some of them don't have timelines. Ward Capital doesn't have a set timeline that's going to need to be spent by. St. Louis Works doesn't have it has a budget that we vote on, but it doesn't necessarily have a timeline. What efforts, I guess, will be made to make sure that because these projects are happening, that neighborhood projects or Ward Capital projects, St. Louis Works projects aren't falling behind or being delayed further? Or do you anticipate that we will see delays in those projects?
I guess I'll take that one. I would assume that we will see delays in those because if we're doing the paving on these ARPA jobs in-house, then in 2025 and 2026, I don't believe there will be a moment to think about paving a residential street as the timeline looks today.
Okay.
It could change depending on how everything works out. If I get to pave something sooner than 2025, then that would take some burden off 2025 and 2026. But some of I expected to start doing some paving on this at some point last year, and if not at this moment currently. So yeah, it's a good solid 2-year paving project. And if we're doing it in 2025 and 2026, we'll be packed.
Yeah, and I know that the streets department is currently at, maybe 2/3 capacity. Are you a third of your employees down right now? I mean, what is the reality of the streets department's paving team even?
We're currently right at 102 people out of 157, 160.
Okay.
The good thing is if the candidates pass some drug and alcohol and physical and background checks, I have about 10 employees starting July 30th.
That is good news.
Let's hope they pass.
Now, for the, we've talked about, this is kind of an off the wall question, but with drug testing, do they need to be drug tested because they'll be operating CDLs, or is it something that personnel, okay, so it's not something that personnel could have figured out in case that was any holdup for folks?
Yeah, CDL requirement is still no weed, I guess is the nice way to put that. And until that's lifted, they will probably always have to be tested for at least marijuana, if not everything else. I mean,
Fair enough.
it is both a physical and a drug test. So there is 2 separate things as part of that coming to the city. But yes.
Well, in terms of how, you said 2025, 2026 will be very busy for streets with paving these major arterials. Does that put the onus on, and I know you and I are trying to find a time to meet next week about Ward 1 projects, but, how are we going to make sure that we spend 2023, the rest of it that we can in 2024, doing all the paving that needs to get done that we know isn't going to get done in 2025, 2026? Because I don't want to get to 2025 and realize nothing got done in my ward. I mean, river to Pear, people are literally gonna riot if we don't get river to Pear fixed, and that is not on this list. So these are the kind of things I just want to make sure that we know as the Ward Capital process unravels the way it does.
Yeah, I think that's the key for all of us, aldermen, streets, even BPS and BPS projects, is that we're aware that we have to get or accomplish everything we can in 2023 and 2024, knowing that very few things are probably going to be accomplished in 2025, 2026. Concrete alone, with the concrete work on these jobs is it's hard to find a concrete contractor today anyway, because they're all so busy currently. And with the workforce being where it is currently, it's also an issue. So I think it's an issue for all of us on this call, and probably others that aren't even on this call, that we're going to have to focus on 2023 and 2024, knowing that almost all of our contractors that are available in 2025 and 2026 are going to be working on these locations.
I think that I have so many more questions on that, but just to pivot a little bit, that brings us to the question which a lot of folks ask aldermen all the time about ward capital and St. Louis Works funds and how they're distributed and how that works. You know, there have been a lot of different conversations at the Board of Aldermen about how those funds should be split up. But to me, it comes back to the fact that we need to know what jobs need to happen, and then we need to be funding those jobs. Though that to me, and we need to be looking at the quality of the roads and the timeline and keeping everything in a rhythm so that we can participate in the Dig Once policy the same way that we ask and expect the utilities to contribute to the Dig Once policy. You know, but we also don't know what necessarily needs to get done as aldermen or what requests have been made. I think we have to set some sort of timeline amongst the board with you about when are requests going to be due, that we will, you know, these things are going to get done and are going to get funded by 2025. Because, you know, if we get to the beginning of 2024 and none of these and we don't have a list, I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, we all know how long these things take. So, you know, I think on our end in this, you know, we have a schedule for ARPA projects, but knowing that we have millions and millions of St. Louis Works and ward capital funds that also need to be spent and should be being spent. I mean, I hate when I have ward capital sitting in my account. It drives me insane. That money should be out in the community doing stuff for people and not in a bank account that's gaining no interest and helping no one. So, you know, I really have a lot of motivation to have a list, have a, you know, a citywide list that, you know, ward capital is paying for these projects, St. Louis Works is paying for this project, and how do those timelines fit in with the ARPA projects too, so we can get that done. I mean, how would you suggest we do that? I mean, how do we get there from where we are now?
I mean, I think the biggest deal currently is, I mean, several aldermen at this point are brand new, essentially. So, I mean, we all just have to get together, and I have to work with each and every one of you to figure out what's actually needed and what we can afford at this point. And we kind of know what's coming in, or at least a ballpark of what will be coming in both St. Louis Works and capital wise next year, and just have that plan almost solidified now. So when we come into next March and we're starting to think about paving, that we already have a list in hand come March. Hopefully we can get everything thought about for 2023 wrapped up in 2023. But historically, it's been nothing unusual to have paving requests come in September, October, November. Obviously, I'm not going to get to them more than likely at that point. But if we can actually solidify whatever we can this year, and by March, have a plan, have a list of what to do out of the gate, able to put our equipment down on the street come the first decent day in April, more than likely we won't have any problem getting that work done. It's just getting to that point. And historically, it's been, I guess, kind of both ways. It's been like pulling teeth from my side, trying to get some aldermen to pave. And some of you also send me requests every day. And it's kind of like pulling my teeth in order to get paving costs sent back your way.
Right.
I think the key to this, though, is by some point in March next year, we need to know where we're going, whether the money's hit the bank yet or not, as far as capital. And I can work with our asphalt supplier, whoever it is, if they know that we're going to be paving something April 1st and aldermanic money is not available on July 1, they can probably work with that, at least within reason.
Sure.
If it starts getting into very large dollar amounts, then that would be a little different. But most material suppliers can handle a little bit of that without making too crazy. But
So to have a concrete pour day in April, when, I mean, all of the bidding goes out, there's a lot that happens then. I mean, when would you say, because I am happy to ring the bell for aldermen, like this is due, because it's not going to happen. I mean, I think that needs to be what people understand, that none of your work is getting done in 25 and 2026. So we need a plan for every dollar of our ward capital for the next 2 years now, so that we can, so it gets spent, so it's on the streets instead.
we can talk a little more about this offline, but I would actually probably move it up to either the last day of December or last day of January. Simply because every time I put a list together, I have to go meet with Ameren, I have to go meet with Spire, ATT, MCI, et cetera. And because they don't know where we're going until we decide where we're going. And then once I have that list, and I think many of you have seen this, where I have a paving list and 10 streets say hold next to them, and they say hold Spire, hold ATT, hold whatever. And so, yeah, I think we might even be getting closer to December, end of December, end of January, somewhere in there, and we can solidify a date on that, and we'll just make that concrete.
Sounds good. I think the piece that kind of stood out for me with what you just said was, we're providing a list to Spire and Ameren saying we're going to do this, and then they say, oh, we're doing work there already. It's not that sounds backwards, because I understand that they have their schedule out further in advance than we do, and that is what sounds backwards to me. That our schedule isn't years in advance, isn't ranking streets by quality of street and working through systematically the list. And I know we could talk forever about, even if we did that, we don't have the money in ward capital only to repave everything as much as we would need to. But we should have scoring systems, and I think we do have a scoring system for streets and where score they are, and how do we use that information to inform ward capital decisions. So obviously there's a lot that we could create better systems around between now and December of 2023 for when we want this to be finished, so that people are able to allocate the funds needed. I definitely have concerns about making sure that everyone's participating, because if some aldermen don't, you can't get a hold of some aldermen to do the work, I mean, it's not helpful. So, that to me is the real issue with ward capital more than any other distribution mechanism. It's when it sits there and isn't used when it's needed. Okay, you and I will keep talking about this, Kent, I'm sure. We will, because we have to, it's our job. But otherwise, I will keep asking. I have so many questions. So you talked a little bit about the idea of having some standardization for arterials. There have been standardization that NACDO has put out, and I think that's the main one that has standardization about different traffic calming mechanisms. Is your goal with standardizing to be able to prevent these sort of long, onerous traffic studies that happen, as opposed to just saying, here's a package we can choose from, design something for the street? I mean, what do you feel like that is going to help us with as we move forward with working on our streets?
So there's various innovative opportunities to calm traffic, say at intersections. That's where a lot of the crashes occur, because there's so many conflicting turning movements. And there's various ways that you could implement protected intersections, or a lot of times the lower cost traffic calming features are what you can afford to implement, and they could be separated from the curb. What's the shape of those that our equipment that we use in the city can navigate around, and what type of turning radii are affected by putting in these bump outs at intersections? There's a lot of guidance that can be obtained when we developed standards for various types of intersection dimensions and the uses for those intersections.
Do you feel like we need to create that, or because it does seem like it has been created, like there are standard things.
Part of the effort will be looking at NACDO, looking nationwide, what other cities have effectively used. Coincidentally, MoDOT has just started a very similar arterial initiative for traffic calming that we've been engaged, just had our kickoff meeting a month ago with the county, MoDOT, East West Gateway, other municipalities to figure out what's the most impactful devices to be used on arterials. So we'll be gleaming information from that effort as we develop ours. So there's no necessarily cookie cutter that fits every situation. We're looking at a whole toolbox that we can use. That I will just give you an example. Street department sweepers. We want these bump outs to be designed so that the sweeper can navigate around it and not throw trash in a 90-degree corner. So we're working very closely with Kent. What type of shape does that bump out need to be to meet the equipment that he has? And then the fire department, they want every feature to accommodate a 125-foot hook and ladder, their largest fire department vehicle, because they never know what vehicle they're going to send to a fire or how big the fire is. So it's a lot of interdepartment discussions that need to go into our standardization of the accepted traffic counting.
It looks like Scott has his hand up. Scott, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was gonna say that on our major projects, so these are projects that we're starting construction on now or are very far along in design, like Jefferson, like Brick Line on North Grand, like the Tower Grove Connector, like 20th Street. When we have the funding available to sort of completely reconstruct these streets, or at least completely reconstruct one side of the street, we're very much following these national best practices, such as from NACTO. I think the challenge comes when we are at a lower level of funding than that, and we're doing kind of a retrofit. We don't have the luxury or the funding to move as many of the curbs or to move as much of the drainage. And so it's about figuring out, how we can kind of overlay some safety features on existing arterials in a consistent manner. I think we're kind of over the hump on major projects, but we are certainly still facing, I think, design challenges on these retrofit projects. And that's what some of these standards will help address.
So we talked a little bit about the interdepartmental communication that happens when you're implementing traffic calming. In terms of the Complete Streets plan, or the Complete Streets ordinance rather, there was or is supposed to be an interdepartmental steering committee to oversee the information of this committee. Can you talk about that committee and how that functions and if it's ongoing?
Yeah, it meets periodically, and we are probably due for a meeting now, actually. So it contains the departments that are listed in the ordinance, and if I just go through them, I'll probably forget some right now, but they tend to all participate, as well as some additional city staff. And I would say, in addition to that idea that we're communicating across departments and across agencies is becoming more and more embedded in the transportation practice. I mean, I think we are robustly working all the city departments, all the relevant city departments, to work with Great Rivers Greenway, who are doing more projects on our streets. We're working, much harder with MoDOT I think we're pushing MoDOT to do safety projects on streets that they manage. And, they had a safety demonstration just yesterday on Page. And there's an example of, they were just going to do a resurfacing project. We as a city asked them, let's not just do resurfacing, let's assess what can be safer on Page, what can be changed as a component of that resurfacing. And they actually delayed the project a little bit. They went out and sought safety funds through their processes, and they're now bringing more money to the table. And there's other examples of that happening in recent years. And so I think the general concept of Complete Streets, of we're building streets that serve a variety of functions and meet the needs of all people using them in different ways. That concept is, just becoming more and more embedded into the everyday practice and the asks we're making of ourselves and of other transportation agencies.
I appreciate that. As somebody who represents a portion of Gravois, it is a very dangerous street, and a lot of intersections have, people have died. There's been accidents. But it's hard to get traffic calming there because it's the, MoDOT connection is just harder to have something to happen. So
Yeah.
that is great that they're interested.
Yeah, and I think, a street like Gravois, that's an area where you can begin with these national best practices like NACTO designs, but a major arterial like that, which carries a lot of traffic and which has a lot of complex intersections, you still have to do that full engineering before you're really going to implement anything there, because one, you want to start with the real data. You want to make sure it's going to work in that context. You have to be mindful of the budget you have. And on streets like Gravois, you have to be aware of where you might be shifting a problem somewhere else or creating a new problem. So that's why, and I feel some of the same frustration frequently, but that's why sometimes the full engineering is really required to develop specific designs for a specific corridor.
Right. I understand the design piece entirely. It's the, survey and study and then design. And I understand that, why they both happen, to see if there's going to be enough money and everything, but it does end up taking a long time, especially when other cities, and this is another kind of shifting question, but there are some intersections where there could be more either temporary or quicker solutions to what's happening. And we've done some of that, in some of the parts of the city, along Grand, there are barricades running down a lot of the areas of Dutchtown along Grand in the center lane because people kept passing each other on, in the suicide lane. So I'm just interested in how those practices fit in. I mean, do you feel like that is a possibility to have these quicker fixes that occur in some places that aren't arterials or are areas where we're seeing more concerns, but perhaps we don't have time for an entire redesign? I mean, how do we create that package? And then how does that move through our system separately or together with all of these other projects we have going?
Grace, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, I can address it at a high level. I think the short answer, Alderwoman, is we've talked about it internally. We don't have a concrete answer back to you, as you know as well, and you've already mentioned it. It depends on what we're looking at and what we mean by like a quick solution. Some of them that Scott and you were just discussing can be more complex and need a full engineering review and design, while other solutions, like we could talk about potentially South Grand in Alderman Cohn's neighborhood. We put down those Jersey barriers, and that helped address some of the issues. So we have been having these conversations on and off internally of what makes sense, what are things we do have in supply versus what we actually need to order. Like, for example, Jersey barriers, while they're great, based on what I've heard, they're also in high demand. So ordering it might take months for us to get that in supply. So I think it's not an easy answer I can give you. I wish I could at this moment. We're still exploring, again, what all those different options are. And I think it's really important that foundational pieces like the mobility plan get started so we can start really talking and doing more engagement with the city and thinking about who we design these streets for. Are there policies and ordinance and budgetary decisions that we need to make in order to be able to meet expectations from our residents? So I think this will be an ongoing conversation that we would love to have with you in the future as we think through all the different options in addressing safety.
I appreciate that. I wonder, how do we, when those sort of things like the Jersey barriers and South Grand go in, is there a measurable way to see if those are helping? If our goal is, zero traffic fatalities, which I think it is. I know we haven't put that in necessarily in writing, although it is in writing in the pedestrian safety action plan from 2013, but that is our goal, is to not have anyone die on our streets. So, do we feel like those are helping, or do we feel like those are more of like knee-jerk reactions to try to have a quick? I mean, what is your assessment there, and how do we assess that?
I think that if we're being honest, that was a quick reaction, but I think that's what also the community is asking for. What are quick reactions and quick solutions we can think through? In terms of the success, we can get back to you and looking at crash data and seeing when those went down. Is there any reports that we can look at? And then we can also talk to SLMPD with traffic enforcement to see if they notice any changes from that. So if you don't mind, I'll put it down as a to-do and get back to you.
That is totally fine. Regarding just pedestrian access in general and sidewalks in the city, we know we have a lot of sidewalks that need to get done, and the ARPA funds that have been spent on our ongoing spends for those. Do you have any sense of how, I think we're in a point right now where we feel like a relief in that we have these ARPA funds that we can do so much of the outstanding requests for sidewalk repairs, but we certainly know those are not the only sidewalk repairs that need to take place, and there will be a lot of sidewalk work in these corridors that the ARPA funds are managing, and as well as in our neighborhoods. Is there any proactive either coordination with walk studies or anything like that to get a real picture of our pedestrian needs in the city? Or should we as aldermen solely be asking folks to put in their requests for repairs? And is that going to be part of the mobility? I guess I'm just interested in the sidewalk piece in general.
Yeah, so one thing I would refer you to now is the ADA transition plan, where there has been a prioritization of key sidewalk corridors that have, broadly speaking, pedestrian generators around them, and where deficient or conditions may be deficient. And so that's already up. That's on the city's website, on the BPS website. We have initiated a couple ward capital projects that use that prioritization as a guide, kind of as a starting point for where the blocks were, where we had missing links in sidewalks, or where conditions were poor, or where we had nearby bus stops that weren't being very well served by current sidewalks. So I would really encourage alder people to maybe use that as a starting point for when you're working through your own ward capital budget, because we want to see that transition plan implemented. I think I'll let Grace speak to this, but I think we've also started allocating funding specifically to ADA projects independently of other ward capital projects. So I might hand that one off to Grace. And then I think Grace and I also are going to have to go shortly because we got the planning commission meeting starting
We'll plan
soon,
to
which
end
we
right around 5.
play different roles in.
We'll try to end right around 5. This is certainly not the only time we're going to have this conversation, or conversations around these topics. And I do really appreciate everyone's time. But go ahead, Grace. And
yeah, I was going to say, let me get back to you further on that. I don't feel confident in answering it on the record, and I didn't want to mislead you. And I also note that Don Rowe, Alderwoman, will appreciate you so much for saying we're going to end at 5. He's already texted me to let me know they won't have quorum if I'm not there.
I will make sure we'll end very soon here. I have a lot of other questions that I have talked to some of you about offline, and I just, for the public knowledge of the answers and the questions and everything, I'm glad that we're able to have these conversations in public. I think the last question that I'll ask now, and I'll see if any of my committee members have any follow-ups before we head off, is around, we have the mobility plan, a transportation plan that will hopefully be coming forward, but that seems to be more of a citywide approach and perhaps not as focused on our neighborhoods or residential streets. We've been talking a lot about how aldermen get approached to do things like traffic calming, whether it's speed humps or putting in barriers or any other different things that happen. And the standardization of that across the board too seems really important. Do you feel like that is something that should be done in conjunction with the citywide planning efforts, or is that going to be something that we think is going to just remain a ward by ward how aldermen want to do it? I mean, or would you think that we need to change the way we do? I mean, there's no wrong answer. It's more just trying to figure out how we start looking at things holistically.
Yeah, so one of the goals within the transportation and mobility plan, and I may start calling it the TMP for short, is to look at, you know, different street typologies. Different streets do different things. They have a different context with the built environment. To assign the correct type of typology to street segments throughout the city, and to look at, you know, what are the typical kind of approaches you might have on these streets, and where is the street typology in its current condition today really not functioning like it should function. So it's not going to get into the level of detail of, you know, the 3200 block of Macklin needs this type of improvement. But it is, I think, when that plan is done, I think it will provide a general guide that can serve as a starting point for those types of conversations. And then bigger picture, it is definitely going to identify key safety projects in areas where we have, you know, a poor safety record. So it will get to the project level there, but then, you know, in a broader sense, I think it'll provide just an elevated level, a starting point of guidance for different types of streets throughout the city.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I do want to be cognizant of time. Any committee members have any other last minute lightning round follow-up questions that they want to ask? No, Alderman Wilmer, okay. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to do this. I know that there's so much that's happening in the city of St. Louis and so many different moving pieces and so many different pots of money. And that's a great thing for our city in so many ways, but it also ends up having some complications when we're trying to figure out how to spend everything in, you know, but that needs a timeline, or spend things that don't adhere to a timeline, but making sure that those money is that money isn't just sitting in an account not being used when we all know there's so much need. So I hope we can continue these conversations. I certainly have plenty of follow-ups. And with that, we can just keep moving along the agenda. I believe everyone on our committee was here today. Clerk Heggs, everyone on this committee was here today, correct? I don't know if Laura Keys needs to actually speak in order to be considered here.
I'm here. I'm so sorry. My internet was spotty. I was driving. I needed to get to a place where I could get to a machine. So I do apologize. But what I did here was that I really would like it very much is if those street issues were handled by a division that took care of that stuff. You know, I'm not saying that aldermen don't need to be consulted, but the people who do that kind of work, it needs to be placed squarely in their wheelhouse.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. So I do want to acknowledge that we have several folks who sent in written comments. Those are all in the drive. It has there's a lot of really interesting points made in those comments. So I'll make sure that I know everyone in the committee has access to it, and hopefully everyone else on the call does too. We got to a lot of the questions that people brought up during those, but certainly not all of them. And with that, I will move to adjourn our meeting. I think I can just adjourn it without a motion. I'll just say thank you again, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and all of this incredible information. It's been so helpful, and I appreciate the generosity with your time. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.